Okay, hi Rod.
Hello.
Today we're talking about Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court's decision to overturn that. And first question I'll ask you is why do you think it happened now?
Well, I think um, I think Justice Kagan got it right in her dissenting opinion. The only thing that has changed is the court. That's the only factor. Since the Trump administration, he was able to nominate 3 justices to the bench in one term, which is I don't know when the last time that happened in one presidential term. And it tilted the court toward an ideological slant that gave the court an opportunity to overturn Roe v. Wade. So I think she got it right. It's really about who is on the court. I wish I could say that the Supreme Court is this impartial body, but they obviously are not. I think there's very much a political bent to what happened there. Which is unfortunate. It's very much harming the credibility of the court. Right? Even if it's not true, the appearance is that this is a purely partisan thing happening with the court now, and that they're acting politically, not judiciously. So, and I happen to share the assessment that these are political actors now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think about the actual legal side of it? I mean, was it legally?
Well, yeah, that's a whole other question, right? I think from a legal perspective, they got it right, actually. Okay, I'm not saying I agree with their opinion. If I were on their court, I would have dissented as well. But from a purely legal perspective, they definitely had a stronger argument than keeping Roe in place, because the problem is, these are what are called substantial due process decisions, which is when the court makes a decision based on cases, right, and precedents, and then it becomes the law of the land. But the law of the land in the United States is not supposed to be dictated by the Supreme Court. It's supposed to be, the laws are supposed to be formed by Congress, right? So there's supposed to be a democratic element to all of our laws. And the problem with Roe is that it didn't have a democratic, it never was put up for a vote ever. So it was basically the Supreme Court ruling by decree. And they've done this many times throughout the 246 years we've had our history. And, some of these due precedent decisions have been very good and very positive. But when you look at it from a purely constitutional perspective, that's not what the Supreme Court is supposed to do. They're not supposed to make the laws. And Roe v. Wade was basically them making the law. And it's a dangerous it's a dangerous path to go down, because they could vote anything like that. The Supreme Court could make any manner of law that way, and that's why they're not supposed to constitutionally. That's their check, right? Their limit of power is, they can only decide if a law in a state is constitutional or not, but they can't actually form a law. And what happened?
Wow.
But they do, of course. And this is not the only case. That there are many very important cases right now that were based on the due process, and one of them is gay marriage, right? That one is also in the same category. And so now there's a big fear that during the next Supreme Court session, that one's going to go too. And again, from a purely legalistic perspective, there really is no justification for the Supreme Court, making that law. But but from a outcome perspective, right? Like the outcome that you want the society to be, you just would assume that the justices would leave it in place, because, I mean, like think about overturning Roe. You know, they did it in one day, and suddenly it's just been chaos ever since. You know,
Oh,
states don't even know where
sorry, Rob, just 5 seconds.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Mhm.
just
No
organizing my lunch there. My
Oh,
lunch.
okay. Got it.
What time my lunch is being cooked?
Priorities.
Very, very important.
Yeah.
So, wow, so I didn't know that at all. So, is there a chance then that they can go to Congress and try and put an abortion law in place? How does that even work? How do you get things to be voted in Congress?
Yeah. Well, somebody would draw up a bill, you know, for the legalization of abortion, and then it would have to pass through the House and then the Senate, and then the president signs it into law. So yeah, this has been in the public consciousness for a long time about codifying law. I mean, or I'm sorry, codifying Roe, meaning
Yeah,
putting it into law through an act of Congress,
yeah,
which would protect it from any Supreme Court decision. So, because you know everybody knew deep down that Roe was on precarious legal ground, and I mean even like Democratic left-wing lawyers knew how terribly it was argued, and you know that it didn't, you know, and all it would take is a majority of conservative justices who felt a certain way to change it.
yeah,
But I think that up until now, you didn't have a court who was willing to tamper with it, right? Because they knew how devastating the impact would be. I mean, on one hand, from a purely theoretical standpoint, the Supreme Court is not supposed to be concerned with outcomes, right? We just follow the law. It's about the Constitution. But some outcomes are so devastating that nobody wants to be responsible for it, right? So I think Supreme Court justices in the past, before this particular court was formed through Trump, they just didn't have any sociopaths until now, you know, where there are people who just don't care about the real world outcome anymore, who feel so strongly about this that they're willing to just, you know, and then protect themselves with like, oh well, we're not about outcomes, we're only about the Constitution. But I think most people who held those seats on that bench were not inclined to change it because they knew how devastating it would be to women, especially to lower income women, right? I mean, this is completely this is ruining people's lives already, right? And so it's crazy, and for them to do it so quickly, no incrementalization to it, it was horribly irresponsible in my view. You know, just terribly bad way of running the Supreme Court. But they're suffering for it. They're getting a lot of backlash, and so are the Republicans for it. So I think the public is like, wait a second, this is not really what we want. You know, so I think it's backfiring in a number of ways.
And what happened in Kansas, apparently, to back that point up, back your point up?
Yeah. So last week in Kansas, there was a proposal given to voters about changing their constitution to include an abortion ban in their state constitution. And the Kansas voters voted overwhelmingly against it. I mean, it wasn't even close. It was like huge number of people voted against it. And so, you know, that got me thinking, like, if this were put to the referendum, you know, in all 50 states, it would be legal everywhere tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what the Supreme Court justices were actually arguing for. They were saying, well, listen, we're kicking this back to states to make their own laws and to make it democratic, which from a purely legalistic perspective, again, there's some credence to that, right? There is some truth to that. But, you know, I think if the people were to get a say on it for real, either through referendum or through direct voting on constitutional amendments and whatnot, we would see it legalized in all 50 states in short order. Yeah.
So are you saying it is now legal in Kansas?
Yeah, they protected the right to have an abortion in Kansas. So
Right.
Kansas will be an abortion state still.
Mm. And then, what is the moral or any argument for pro-life, as they say in America? Yeah.
The pro-life side, what is their view?
What is the moral for any argument?
Well, I think some people think of it as murder, right?
Mm.
You know, some people believe that from conception, you know, there is a life being formed, and that nobody should ever go through the process of having an abortion for that reason. And I think it's important to note that, you know, there are pro-lifers in the Democratic Party, right? I mean, this is not a clear-cut partisan issue by any means. You know, there are Republicans who are very pro-life, and there are, you know, like Nancy Pelosi is a good example, right? She's a very devout Catholic who has been excommunicated from certain churches. Like, she isn't even, like, the Pope won't even talk to her because of her pro-choice stance. So there is quite a bit of overlap in this country on where people stand on that particular issue. Because,
sorry, you know, she's what is she? She's pro-life or pro-choice?
She's pro-choice, very, very pro-choice.
Okay, but she's a Democrat.
She is a Democrat, but she's also she's a devout Catholic, though,
but she's a Catholic. That's the point. Yeah.
Yeah, and she's pro-life. But yeah, you know, they've polled Republicans. Something like 59% of Republicans across the country think abortion should be basically legal, right? I mean, not like let's just legalize it for all circumstances, but who believe it should be basically legal for, you know, in cases of you know, rape and incest and threat to the woman's life. And by the way, in all 50 states, even the most strict bans do make an exception for a threat to the woman's life. But how do you even assess that in the moment, right? I mean, doctors have to make those decisions. I mean, where does it end? Like, where do you draw the line and say, oh yes, this would have actually killed the mother? They don't know, right? It's hard to know that, because after you do the abortion, you'll never know what would have happened otherwise, right? So it puts you into this very murky territory where, you know, so doctors are very afraid to perform, you know, abortions, even in those cases, because, and then of course with like the rape and incest thing, this means a woman has to go to a court and convince a judge that she's been raped or, you know, and that's a whole other harrowing experience, right? So it's just re-traumatizing all over again. And then to have a judge not believe you, right? I mean, it just doesn't. It just needs to be legal. So, you know, this is, but the pro-life, you know, their view is that, you know, this is a human life growing, and you know, and I am partially sympathetic to that view, right? I mean, we don't want abortions to be encouraged, in my opinion, or, you know, I mean, I don't like the idea of it. You know, I would like to live in a world where no woman ever needed to have an abortion. You know, that would be a great, fantastical world that I would love to build. But that's not the world we live in, right? I mean, the truth is, women get assaulted sexually all the time, and they get pregnant, not being their fault, all the time. So, you know, they need the freedom to get out of those situations, you know, in my view.
And and the number of weeks differs from country to country, doesn't it? I heard that in France or Germany it's 12 or 14 weeks, whereas in the UK it's more 22. And that I have seen pictures at 22 weeks. So you are talking about what looks very much like a baby. So in America, Roe versus Wade was what, 20? It was in the 20-week area, right?
Yeah, I'm actually not sure. I know they kept changing it, and the parameters kept changing.
So I think the key is in America, and and the UK was viability. So you can have an abortion up to when the baby is viable, and that's why it's 22, 24 weeks. But I was surprised to hear that, yeah, France and Germany were a lot less.
But that seems to me like the solution, right? I mean, you have a smaller window that more people can get on board with, right?
Yeah.
But it's far enough along that women can really know for sure that they're pregnant, right?
Exactly.
And give them time to make a decision on it, because that it's not an easy decision to make. I can't imagine many women make that decision easily, or I'm sure it's something that weighs heavily on them. And I think up to 14 weeks, for example, that gives a woman ample time to know for certain that she is pregnant, and to give her a couple of weeks to really think about it. And like, is this the way I want to go forward? It just seems like the most humane way to go.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And the other thing I heard, I know you said it's not a party political issue, but I think it definitely has moved more to a Republican side, the pro-life because I heard, in the 60s when JFK was president, he was a Catholic. It was more of a Democrat thing. And then if you think about Republicans wanting their freedoms, right? Well, freedom to choose, right, for women. So that has changed. And then I suppose the rise of fundamentalist Christians as well, who are more on the right. So it has changed as a political issue.
Yeah.
Even though it's policy.
Yeah. Although I think in my lifetime, though, it's been pretty much Democrats are pro-life in general, and Republicans are pro-life in general.
Yes. But it was different in the 60s. Yeah.
Yeah, but who else has been pro-life almost all of his life until about 2022 is Joe Biden. So, I mean, back in the 80s, he wanted Roe v. Wade overturned so that states could decide just as they did now. So, this is where it gets, and he's also Catholic, right? So this is where it gets a little bit murky, But I'd say now at this point he's very much in favor of the liberal leaning side on it, up to the point he's willing to sign law to codify Roe. Actually, he has said that. So if they can get it through, I don't know if they can get it through though, because we live in a very sort of unfortunately, so many people in Congress represent the 10% extremists. Like, why can't people in the middle elect people who represent them, which is the much larger percentage? There's no energy there, right? There's no moderates aren't on Twitter every day, right? It's the extremists that get all the attention, and they have the blowhorn, right? And so that we wind up with this completely skewed system where our representatives do not represent us at all, except for a very small segment. And so, but maybe codifying Roe is the way to go. But then again, the Supreme Court could strike it down and say, well, this isn't constitutional, because the grounds that they use, and this is a slippery slope, and I don't think a lot of legal scholars agree with Alito on this. But in the Constitution, we have what are called enumerated rights, right? These are like the Bill of Rights. These are actual things, like freedom of speech is an enumerated right, meaning it's listed as an actual right. The right to bear arms, the Second Amendment, that's a enumerated right.
Yeah.
But then the 9th Amendment of the Constitution says that enumerated rights should not be interpreted as not giving, I don't know how they word it, but basically what the 9th Amendment says is that enumerated rights should not be interpreted to mean that these are the only rights that people have and that nothing else, there are unenumerated rights too that need to be protected. And so from a 9th Amendment perspective, I think Roe could be codified. Like, this is something that Congress has agreed to do. not a, you know, I mean, to really protect it forever, it would be a constitutional amendment making it legal in all 50 states, which would, you know, that would just, you know, ironclad it into the Constitution. But I don't think we will ever get to a 2/3, you know, majority on that. I mean, it's hard to get a constitutional amendment. Not just Congress, but state legislatures also need to be on board with them too. So, probably not possible. But getting it codified, I think there is a good legal argument that the Supreme Court couldn't touch it if it fell under the 9th Amendment, right? So,
I see. And then you need 2/3 to get it through.
But his point, Alito says, abortion is not enumerated. It's not written into our Constitution. Therefore, we can't say it's legal. Now, I don't think many legal scholars agree with him on that.
Yeah.
You know, because of the 9th one. And so that's a slippery slope, though, to be like, okay, we're only going to reduce ourselves to 8 rights, you know, including, well, no, that I was going to say the women's suffrage, but that is a constitutional amendment. So, but I mean, so many rights that we take for granted would be taken away. I mean, wow. that have come over the years, over the last, you know, 200 years. So I think he's on a slippery slope, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Anything else you'd like to say on the matter, Rod?
Well, I just want to ask you, what's your view on it, Gerard? What do you think about it?
Yeah. Well, definitely up to what I heard, the first trimester, which is 12 or 14 weeks, where it doesn't really resemble a baby. And then after that, maybe it should be a little more difficult. I haven't heard the argument for why does it go up to 22 weeks, but I'm sure people can make a good argument. But yes, I think women should have the right to choose. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, good. Thank you for. We'll stop it here.
Okay. Cheers, Rob.